All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're getting into the really surprising science of what actually motivates you, what drives you to succeed. This is a puzzle that I think we all face, right? You get some tough feedback. Sometimes it just lights a fire under you, and other times, well, it completely crushes your spirit. So, what's going on there? What's the real difference? Turns out the answer is probably not what you'd think. Okay, so to really get this, we need to start with something called the mental effort paradox. This whole thing is about how feedback really impacts our drive. I mean, the standard thinking on this is pretty simple, right? Praise, that makes you work harder. Criticism, that just makes you want to give up. But as some researchers from Utrecht University found out, our brains are actually wired in a much, much more interesting way. Yeah, even the researchers who studied this point out that look, self-efficacy, that's basically your belief in your own abilities. Sure, it's a big deal, but it's not the whole story, not by a long shot. And to get that full picture, we've got to look at this other really powerful framework. And that right there brings us to the core concept for today, the biopsychosocial model of challenge and threat. Seriously, how our brain deals with this is the key to solving this whole motivation puzzle. So this idea comes from a researcher named Jim Blaskovich, and it says that in any kind of demanding, high-stakes situation, our brain does this lightning-fast, almost totally subconscious calculation. It's basically weighing the demands of the situation against the resources we think we have to handle it. And that little bit of mental math, it leads us to one of two states. If you feel like your resources, your skills, your knowledge, even the people you can count on, if you feel like they can meet or even beat the demand, boom, you're in a challenge state. But if those demands feel like they're just too much, like they're about to swallow you whole, you flip into a threat state. I mean, that totally makes sense, doesn't it? When we feel challenged, we do better, we're dialed in, we're energized. But, and this is a big but, when it comes to our motivation, our willingness to keep trying, that threat state can have a really unexpected effect. Okay, so how do you even test this stuff? Well, these researchers designed a really clever experiment to see what's actually happening with feedback, our mindset, and our motivation. The whole setup was actually pretty simple. They had participants tackle some really tough puzzles, and then they gave them fake feedback. It didn't matter how they actually did. Some were told, hey, you did great. Others were told they did pretty poorly. The real question, the one they were trying to answer, was this. How was that feedback going to affect their motivation for the next round of puzzles? So you can see the journey each person went on right here. First, they try to solve these tricky problems. Then they get that fake feedback. After that, the researchers measure their mindset. Are they feeling challenged or are they feeling threatened? And then, and this is the really critical final step, they ask them, okay, how much effort are you willing to put into the next set of problems? All right, so what happened? What did they actually find? This is where all our common sense ideas about what motivates us, they get turned completely upside down. Yeah, this was the million-dollar question, right? Did the feedback, whether it was positive or negative, actually change how willing they were to try harder? And the answer was, surprisingly, nothing. That's right. When the researchers looked for a direct link, there was basically no difference. The group that got praise and the group that got criticism were, on average, just as willing to try hard again. How crazy is that? So, how is that even possible? It sounds totally wrong. Well, it's because the feedback itself wasn't the end of the story. It was actually just the trigger for two totally different psychological paths. That, believe it or not, led to the exact same destination. Okay, so check this out. Here's the first piece of that hidden mechanism. While the feedback didn't directly change motivation, it absolutely changed their mindset. And you can see it right here. Getting that negative feedback, it significantly cranked up their feelings of being threatened, way more than the positive feedback did. I mean, no big surprise there, right? And here is the huge twist. This is the kicker. Both the challenge state and the threat state made people more willing to invest effort. Think about it. People who felt challenged, of course they wanted to try harder to prove they could succeed, but the people who felt threatened, they also wanted to try harder. They wanted to defend themselves, to avoid failure, to prove they weren't incompetent. So that's why the effect was totally invisible on the surface. You had two different engines driving the exact same outcome. Positive feedback motivated people through the confidence of a challenge, but negative feedback, it motivated them through the sheer urgency of a threat. Two completely different paths, both leading to the same place, wanting to try harder. Okay, so what in the world does this mean for you and me? This isn't just some interesting finding from a lab. This is actually a really powerful new lens for understanding our own drive and motivation. So look, here's the bottom line. Motivation isn't really about what happens to you. It's about the story you tell yourself about what's happening. Feeling threatened can absolutely make you work harder, sure, but man, it is a stressful, anxious way to live. The real power, the real game changer, is learning how to reframe that feeling of threat into a feeling of challenge. So how do you actually do that? When you feel that threat response kicking in, that sinking feeling of being overwhelmed, the trick is to pause and consciously take stock of your resources. What skills do you actually have? Who can you ask for help? What do you already know? Just by focusing on what you do have, you can start to tip that internal scale from, I can't do this, back to, okay, I can take this on. So the next time you feel that wave of pressure, that moment of doubt, just ask yourself the question you see here. Are you looking at a threat? Or is this really a challenge that's just waiting for you to meet it? Because the choice and all the motivation that comes with it, well, that's up to you. Thanks for joining us on The Explainer.